And joining us now is Bill Donohue, who's President and CEO of the Catholic League, the nation's largest Catholic civil rights organization. And Bill is the author of 5 books, including his latest, Why Catholicism Matters. Bill, thanks a lot for joining us. I appreciate a few minutes.
Well, thank you so much, Richard. Pleasure to be here.
You know, as they say, you're preaching to the choir here when you say why Catholicism still matters. But when we take stock as the laity of our church, how would you assess the health of it right now?
Well, I've seen it when it's a lot better, that's for certain. There's no question about it. The heyday of Catholicism in America, as every historian agrees, was the 1950s. And, of course, our culture went into certain kinds of convulsions in the 1960s, a much more secular thrust, which is still with us today. The Catholic Church has had, of course, a rough go of it, didn't it, with the scandal that broke loose actually in the 60s and 70s, quite frankly, and the early 80s. We didn't really come to fruition in terms of the news stories until about 10 years ago, but that is largely behind us. So I think we were in some still troubled waters, but there are some positive signs as well. I mean, there is a hunger and a thirst for matters spiritual. I just read in the New York Times a front-page story, to give you one anecdote, of how classical musicians are now engaged in more sacred music than we've seen in a long, long time. And they're pointing to the need for transcendence and for value and meaning in their lives. So I still think that Catholicism has a strong role to play in our society, particularly in these troubled times.
You know, Bill, I got a couple kids in parochial school. I'm there on Sundays like you are, albeit at a different parish. I don't think the disillusionment is with the faith at all. I believe, especially in these times, people are looking for guidance, spiritual as well. But there's been a break here with church, or at least church leadership. And if we break it into pieces, I'd love to get your perspectives why. And let's start off with the pews. Pews used to be a lot more filled than they are now. And, you know, we both know the guys who just show up on Easter and Christmas, but they were always there. It's the hardcore that aren't going as much, and there's a lot of different reasons. Why do you think less people are going on Sundays than they used to?
Well, I think part of it has to do with the general dumbing down of standards in our entire society. From the bedroom to the boardroom, we've been told that there's no penalty for failure. We've been lowering the bar in athletics and in the schools and education, in the autistic community. So I think that to some extent, people have just simply gotten lazy, and they don't seem to have any kind of sense of guilt and shame about their laziness in this. So the indifference is there. But there's a profound difference between indifference and people who are angry. I don't think it's so much anger that we're dealing with today. I have a lot of friends and some family members who I think are good people, and they certainly haven't lost the faith, but are they more likely to sleep in on Sundays now than was true maybe 30 years ago? Yes, I think that's generally true. I think it has a lot to do with the softening in our society in many respects.
Well, it also, I think, has to do is sometimes the relatability for the laity to the priest at the front. And I can only tell you, from my perspective, you know, you got priests now from Asia and from Africa, and God bless them, but sometimes people are having a hard time understanding, let alone relating, and they're at the front of the church out of necessity, Bill, because you look at the numbers of priests that are getting ordained right now, for crying out loud. You look in the New York Archdiocese, the biggest archdiocese, and it's just, I mean, jaw-dropping how few people are coming through. And then you look at how many guys, how many churches these priests have to literally hop around to on a Sunday, and the ages of these guys, and it comes up to a head about the relatability and not even enough of a population of priests to serve what laity we have.
That's true. Now let's take a look at those dioceses and those religious orders which are doing well. What do they have in common that makes them different from the rest? They tend to be orthodox. They tend to be unapologetically orthodox. You take a look at the sisters, for example, those orders of nuns which have mistaken their vocation for that of social work and have exchanged their whole clothing to become much more secular. These are not attracting young women at all. In fact, they're dying out. The ones that are doing well are the ones such as the Sisters of Life and others, because they take their vows very seriously and a much more orthodox strain. The same is true with the orders of priests. The more orthodox the order, the more likely they're going to draw. And it's also true amongst the dioceses across the country. In other words, the answer to this problem in terms of the clergy and the religious is not to assimilate further to the dominant culture and to have teachings and water things down that you're almost indistinguishable from the editorial board of the New York Times. You take a look at the Protestant community. The evangelicals are not the ones that are dying. It's the mainline Protestant denominations, the Episcopalian Church, the Methodists, the Lutherans, the Presbyterians. They are dying out in record numbers. Orthodox Jews are gaining more members than is true of the Reform Jews. So orthodoxy sells in a society which is secular, and that's because people want to have something to believe in. They want some teeth. They don't want to deal with a religion of indifference.
Well, no,
I think that's the answer to the future.
Bill, for me, listen, it's not one size fits all, frankly, and sometimes, when I go to church, I'm not looking for a political sermon. It's funny. The church will tell me on Sunday, they'll get into, and I'm not asking for the Catholic Church to be pro-choice. I don't expect that will ever happen, nor do I think it's a problem. They're pro-life. I get it. But you know what? I never hear anybody sermonizing up at the front screaming about the death penalty and about condemning it because the Catholic Church is clearly against it. I don't hear them screaming about cuts to social safety net programs. A Catholic Church that I grew up in was feed the hungry and clothe the naked. So there seems to be selective politics, and that's not why I'm going to church on Sunday. I'm trying to get the message of God, and I don't need all the other stuff stuck in. And when we talk about priests, I know a lot of people, and I'm sure you too, that not only left the order, but never joined the order because they couldn't get married. And you mentioned all the other faiths. You're in the Protestant faith, that you're a minister, you can be married. You're in the Jewish faith, and you're a rabbi, you can be married. And for me, the crock of it is, and I know you know this, but a lot of the laity doesn't, we used to let priests get married until the 12th century. Also, there's loopholes. Guys can join the Catholic Church from the Greek Orthodox Church with a family, and with a wife and a family. They're welcome with open arms. And there's other exceptions also. To me, I think it's not modernizing, but we did it before. If we did it before, why won't we to have our church survive, more priests that are more relatable to the laity and let these guys get married? It doesn't take away from their ability to lead a church.
Well, a couple of interesting things there. When Cardinal Egan was stepping down from being the Archbishop of New York, he came out and said maybe we should reconsider the whole idea of celibacy. After all, celibacy is a discipline. That is to say, it's a man-made stricture or rule of the Catholic Church, which they can, of course, change. And maybe, in fact, the time has come to change. The only thing I would say is this. If we think that that's going to bring more priests in, consider the fact, again, that the mainline Protestant denominations, they all allow married priests. So if celibacy is a problem, how does one explain the fact that they're losing their clergy much faster than we are? So that, I think it's more complicated than even that. In terms of the political, you're right, they don't talk about the death penalty and the hunger and the poor, but they'd also, at least in the churches I go to, they don't talk about abortion, they don't talk about sexuality, they don't talk about much of anything that has to do with the contemporary scene. I think most priests have become terrified of upsetting one segment of the population or the other, which is why they tend to focus on the gospel and the parables and the like. I would welcome maybe a bit more of a forthright discussion, although I join with you in that I don't want to hear a political sermon, whether it's one I agree with or one I disagree with, when I go to church on Sunday.
Bill, let's talk about the sisters, because in putting this together, we've spoken to more than a dozen sisters in different orders. And I got to tell you, everybody's entitled to their own opinion. Mine as good as yours. But we've spent, when we put money into the offertory plates, I don't know about you, I didn't know that my money was going for secret payoffs here in the abuse scandal. And while I don't want to spend this program and this time here talking about obviously a painful chapter in the church, for the Vatican to come down on nuns who are doing some of the most thankless work, working with the most vulnerable in this society, for them to go after this population after everything that went on, aiding and abetting pedophiles, for crying out loud, I got to tell you, it gets me right here. These women, these older women, don't ask for a penny, and because their dress and because their obeyance isn't in line, is this really who we ought to be going after right now? nuns. You don't have a problem with that bill? To me, I mean, I can't tell you the amount of people, the unanimity here of people say, are you crazy? Every nun that I know, first of all, is a tough you-know-what, and second of all, they're the best of who we are as a church, and we're going after them?
Well, you know, in my book, Why Catholicism Matters, I do have a segment there on justice. I cover the 4 cardinal virtues, and that's heavily on the contribution of nuns. What the nuns have done in this country has been extraordinary. It's also extraordinary, too, how many nuns have gone off the rails. See, I don't agree with your interpretation. I'm glad the Vatican is having an inquiry. No one's losing any license to teach. When we have nuns who are pro-abortion and who sign in on full-page ads in the New York Times that they're pro-abortion and the Catholic Church is wrong, that they've gone beyond Jesus, that they're into Buddhist spirituality and the like, these are people who have actually left the reservation, and I as a Catholic do not want to fund nuns who have lost their faith altogether. They are a minority, thank God, but there's not just 1 or 2. I could tell you some stories that make your head spin.
All right, but Bill, we talked to a bunch of nuns who are going to Kansas City, all right, for the meeting. Their group represents almost 90% of the sisters in this country here. And again, I didn't find a radical feminist among them, but they said, among other things, wait a minute. Let me understand this. And I dragged it out of them, but they said, we spent more than $2.5 billion, us Catholics here, okay, paying for these abuse settlements and payoffs since 50 to 2008. You got 8 dioceses that have shuttered down here. The Vatican, who either look the other way or shuttle these priests around. And I know you and I both agree here, the tragedy of it are the priests, the good priests, the vast majority of them that are painted with the same scarlet letter now because of the Vatican. And they're going after the nuns. I tell you, to me, I mean, for crying out loud, we're seeing a guy that was handcuffed and sent away in Philly right now, and we're going after sisters. It just seems so emblematic of these guys missing the forest for the trees. We got bigger problems in this church than going after some of the few people who are on the front lines for us. Forget fine that they may say something about pro-choice or whatever. We need these people, even if you don't agree with everything they say.
No, I don't think we need people who are pro-abortion. They're in the wrong religion. Let them become a Protestant. I don't think that it's okay for a person to be a Catholic, never mind a religious, and say that you can have child abuse in the womb. Now, as far as those nuns who claim to represent these 95%, only 3% of the nuns actually contributed in their dues. This nuns on the bus campaign was the biggest fraud and scam perpetrated on the Catholic people I've ever seen in my life. They never had more than 6 nuns on their luxury bus at any one time, and only 2 nuns out of the entire United States of America actually went on the entire tour for a couple of weeks. I don't think we should be sucked in by some radicals who have obviously lost their moorings in the Catholic Church. And at the same time, I will say, I don't want to be misunderstood, most nuns have served this country and the Catholic Church so well. I am extremely proud of them. But I am also, my heart goes out to those nuns and those ex-nuns who have talked to me for decades about how come nobody ever speaks up for them. I know nuns who have gone back into habit, and they are treated as a pariah, as dirt, by the nuns who are involved in their kind of Sister Polyester attire. No, there's a real problem there, and that's why Catholics complain to the Vatican, and finally the Vatican is looking at it.
Well, maybe some do, but I tell you, for one, I'm not among them. And by the way, it's not like we got a bunch of these young rabid feminists going around here. I haven't found a nun, about you, under 40. And unfortunately, most of them are closer to 70 than in the middle of their lives. But let's agree to disagree on that one. Here's where I'm concerned. Outgoing priest of my kid's parochial school says, listen, if you want your kids to have a Catholic education, you're going to have to fight for it because it's frankly vanishing. And the amount of schools that are shuttering their doors, Bill, you know, if you care and love the faith, let alone the church here, it should scare everybody. There's a lot of reasons as to why, but do you see it very conceivably here? Forget about the Catholic hospitals. Just deal with the church. Just deal with the parochial schools. We could be looking 20 years from now. We'll be lucky if we find a few in every district, for crying out loud.
Well, here we agree 100%. And I taught in Spanish Harlem in a very rough neighborhood I loved them. They treated me wonderfully, and the people in the neighborhood were wonderful. That was back in the 1970s. I've seen firsthand what the Catholic Church and the Catholic schools can do in the inner city ghetto. And it is a shame that the Catholic Church has not put more money into having these schools survive. The school that I taught in was closed here about maybe 7 or 8 years ago up in Spanish Harlem. Those are the places where we've done God's missionary work, and we should keep them open at all cost. Unfortunately, for all kinds of reasons, some of them legitimate, others are not so legitimate, and you implied as such, I think, in your previous comments, too much money being paid out for the stupid decisions and morally bankrupt decisions that were made by some people in the past. But no, we've got to have Catholic education, particularly at the elementary and secondary level. Otherwise, we will lose a whole generation. I'm with you on that 100%, Richard.
And what people don't understand is when they hear private school, it's different. It's the best bargain that there is here in terms of tuition, and you know, I'll maintain whatever it's worth here. I'm biased, but some of the best kids come out of there. But in these inner cities, they just can't afford. They can't jack the tuition up because these families can't afford it. So if the church doesn't go on the arm for them to help them out, they're never going to be able to make it, and that's the big problem, let alone you don't have enough people in the orders anymore, whether it be sisters or priests that can also do a lot of the teaching. I just don't know how this gets solved, Bill, unless, you know, something radically changes that I don't foresee. The money's just not there.
And they have to do something about this, because if we just have Catholic schools for the middle class and the elite, then that's not Catholic. Yep. The word Catholic means universal, and we're supposed to be concerned about the least among us. No, there is a problem, obviously, with the exodus of large numbers of sisters, and certainly you have to pay the lay people a living wage. They still get paid less money and do a better job than their counterparts in the public schools. But quite frankly, unless there is some way in which they can subsidize this with other funds for other causes, we are going to see a diminution of the Catholic presence in the inner city. And as a person who taught there and saw firsthand the great job the Catholic schools do, I think this is an absolute disgrace.
Finally, Bill, for me, I get this troubling sense that there is some, in fact, even a growing number, that feel, hey, you know what? I'd rather lose another chunk of this population, of the Catholic population, not just in the States but globally here, and only have the truly committed. And it's as if, you know, they're willing to double down here, and as a consequence, you know, either further erode the base of this church. And the gap between laity and Vatican just seems to be getting bigger and bigger. Do you have any sense here that I'm not looking for them to modernize, for crying out loud, but what I'm looking for them is to be more relatable? Is there a sense that at least they acknowledge the problem? Or do they think, hey, you know what, divine intervention will step in, everything will be just A-okay, all we got to go back is to the old way?
There's no question they know there's a problem. I've had lots of talks with bishops about this, and you'll find differing opinions, of course, within them. They don't line up single file as to how to resolve the question. I've been quoted in the New York Times here recently as saying that Pope Benedict, before he became Pope, Joseph Ratzinger, Cardinal Ratzinger, said a smaller church might be a better church. I would agree with that, but I don't want to be misunderstood. I don't want the fidelity police at my church questioning me when I go in for a catechism lesson, and there are some people on the right who are like that. What I'm saying is that the people who on the fringe, that would be on the right as well as on the left, I don't know that we can accommodate everybody. I think perhaps sometimes when a tent gets too big, it can collapse in the middle. But yes, we have to reach out to people. There are a lot of Catholics out there who are disaffected, but they are reachable. And it is the job of the faithful to reach out to them, beginning with the episcopate, with the bishops. So, again, I'm with you on that, buddy. Nice work. Thank you.
Hey, finally, you hopeful here, Bill? I mean, I know we're supposed to be optimistic, but we're also, you know, by definition, if we're Catholics, we get the guilt and we get jaded. That said, you got any sense that 20 years from now, the church is in a better place than it is now, or do you think the trend continues?
No, I think our worst days are behind us. I think we've learned some hard lessons, and I think that there'll be a lot of good changes going forward. Quite frankly, Richard, if I wasn't optimistic about the future, what ambition would I have to get out of bed in the morning and go to work as the president of the Catholic League? It's because I think that we can overcome a lot of problems, some of which are self-generated. I'm the first one to admit. And there's an animus in our society, though, I think, toward organized religions in general. I think that we have to make some changes, but I'm confident about the future in the long run. Otherwise, I say I couldn't do this job.
Hey, Bill, thank you very much. I appreciate a few minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity.